And we're live! Hello, it's Tuesday, November 24th, and this is the fifth installment of USENIX's LISA Conversations. I'm Lee Damon, Senior Computing Specialist at the University of Washington.
And hello, I'm your co-host, Tom Limoncelli, Site Reliability Engineer at StackOverflow.com. Each month, LISA Conversations brings you a speaker or other information from past USENIX conferences to discuss their presentation and find out what's new.
If you're watching live, we would love to have your questions. There's a Q&A button in the upper right corner. If you don't see it, but you do see a 3x3 grid, click on the grid first, and then it should bring up the Q&A corner.
In this episode, we'll be chatting with three attendees from the LISA conference that just ended. It's our LISA wrap-up episode. Welcome Chaz Blackwell, Jessica Hilt, and Jeff Halprin. So to kick it off, why don't each of you tell us a little about yourself and your top three highlights from this year's LISA?
Should I go first?
Sure.
I'm Chaz Blackwell. I'm the manager of DevOps at Newstar's Media Intelligence Group, and this is my fifth LISA, I think, the second one in the last couple years. And I think my top three, probably Mikey Dickerson's keynote about the U.S. Digital Service, if only just for his hierarchy of reliability, I think he called it, the incident analysis workshop, and Connie Quinn's talk on managing people in prod ops.
Jeff, you want to go next?
Sure. Jeff Halprin. I am I guess I'll call it a DevOps interested consultant. I'm working on trying to introduce DevOps practices into very large enterprises, including telcos, which may explain why I drink so much whiskey. I think my big wins for the conference, all the keynotes were great. I thought they all had a lot to say. I think Mikey was fantastic. The message about how to actually affect change in those sorts of enterprises that are traditionally resistant to that sort of change was a really good message. Jez was great, and he allowed me to actually take enough slides out of my deck that I could fit in my time slot, but it was good. And I think the stuff around what was it called? The software supply chain. I thought some of the ideas in that were quite interesting. So they're probably my three takeaways.
And Jessica?
I'm Jessica Hilt. I'm from the University of California, San Diego. I do something called Technical Outreach and Program Analyst, which is a fancy way of saying I'm a nerd herder. And I think the three things that I liked the most about the conference was I loved Alice Goldfuss's talk on meatfrastructure, which gave me some great insight on DevOps and working with remote employees and how to create a community when you have employees all over the place. I really liked the hallway conversations. Dinner on Wednesday night was amazing. I got to meet some great people and have some great conversations. And then I did my first LISA talk, and being somebody who suffers a little bit from imposter syndrome, being able to be in a super smarty pants space and do a talk was a big highlight for me.
Thank all three of you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Welcome to the conversation. For those watching along at home, we're going to do things a little differently. Ordinarily, we would have one person and discuss the talk that they gave and follow up on it. Today, we're just going to have a conversation about the conference that was, what we took away from LISA, and general conversation about that. So that said, any opening thoughts from our three visitors?
No, go first.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that Mikey Dickerson talk. One of the things that Chas and I were talking about was like how much we loved that talk and how much we got from it. For me, a big thing was I work in, at a university level, so a lot of times I have a really hard time convincing people that we work for a bigger, greater cause. And Mikey was just so eloquent and articulate about like how passionate he was about what he was doing and how that kind of motivates the people behind the scenes. And I really, just absolutely loved it and felt that at a university level we don't do that enough. And so it was nice to see somebody actually putting that into action in a government level and succeeding.
Yeah, for me too, that just that sense of something bigger was definitely something that has appealed to me every time I've heard anyone talk about the USDS or 18F. Like I've seen a couple other people talk about it in the past. And like the bureaucracy part is the one part that makes me go, wow, I don't think I ever want to do that. But yeah, ever since I used to work at the University of Illinois, and I moved out here to the Bay Area about 4.5 years ago. And that's one of the things I definitely miss about working for a university is that you definitely feel better about what you're doing seems more important than ad tech or
Right.
the laundry startups that James talked about in his keynote in his talk.
Right. So if I can just break in for a second, for our listeners at home, Mikey Dixon is in charge of the U.S. Digital Service, which is a new division of the executive branch. Where if you're not familiar with the name, he's one of the people that left Silicon Valley to help the healthcare.gov website get on its feet, and now he's working there full time and is setting up little projects to do similar things on other projects within the government. So immigration. I mentioned a couple different projects.
Veterans Affairs was a current one.
Affairs.
Yeah.
College scorecard. Yeah.
Oh, right, the college scorecard, which was really interesting because, I'm a fan of summering down. Well, actually, let me just. Where's I going? And someone also mentioned 18F, which is a new initiative within the government to, you know how government websites kind of suck? It's because they don't have the benefit that corporate websites have of, a unifying UI library and design standards and all this stuff. And, I've been at really big companies that, their websites look really good because someone took the time to make a library that make it easy so any idiot like me can just use this library and then you get a really good, awesome looking website. Well, 18F is this group that's trying to do that for government websites, and they've had some really good success stories. So what I want to say about the college scorecard is, if you're rich, what college, and you're trying to decide what college to go to, you have friends that you can talk to, right? And if you're at a good school, you have guidance counselors you can talk to. And actually, one of the biggest impediments for people, everyone else, is, how do I find out what college to go to? Everyone knows Harvard, Yale, etc. But what about the myriad of other things? And so this project is to make a kind of like how on cereal boxes you have all that nutrition information condensed into one table that is in a format that everyone understands and can read. Do that for universities. And it's a huge endeavor because it's collecting data from all these universities, and you want it to be up to date, so it's real-time data, and it's needs to be presented in a searchable, findable way. And 18F is helping them put together a really awesome website. So that's just one of the projects he was talking about.
So during his talk, he posted a graphic of a triangle of needs, as it were. And if you follow me on Google+, you saw the picture posted with, "This will be in your textbooks soon." So if you're curious, this was referred to earlier in the opening comments. If you're curious, go back and look in my feed. You'll find it there. It's quite an interesting little diagram and very accurate. Well, that killed the conversation.
Well, I was wondering if someone wanted to give if someone wanted to talk about that. Let's drill down on that. I think that's really useful.
I'll have to pull up my copy of it. But yes, it was. I mean, I'm as everyone at the conference was, I'm a huge fan of those sorts of tools that help you articulate these things in conversations with others. So that it's a really effective way to help get the message across to what are the important things we do. And how do we, I guess one of the themes that I explored in my talk was people talk about DevOps as this sort of, the next stage of the life of a sysadmin, but that, in my mind, isn't quite true. It's much more that DevOps is the next stage of maturity for developers, and SRE and things like that are the next stage of maturity for for sysops. So one of the things then that you get is you get a bunch of developers who, because in the old world, don't understand what operations looks like. Traditionally they made a bunch of bad assumptions like, what do you mean production doesn't look like my desktop? And what do you mean it's not a vanilla vendor install? And what do you mean that the target environment's hostile? And so they've had to learn all of those lessons the hard way as we've mentored them in the realities of production. And part of the DevOps journey is getting them to take that maturity curve, faster and easier and all the rest of it. And Mikey's tool is one of those great tools that helps them understand the things they need to concentrate on that journey.
Yeah, so he was having this problem where he was having trouble explaining to government executives that reliability is a feature. I mean, they were trying to work on features that were like, add this new menu item and stuff. And so he came up with this diagram with reliability.
I've got the diagram. So just for reference, the bottom line is monitoring. So it's like a Maslow pyramid. The bottom line is monitoring. The second line is incident response. The third line is post-mortems and root cause analysis. The fourth line is testing. And then above those is the top two, which are development and products.
Right. And it was this kind of light bulb went off in the executive's head that if you don't get the base right, it's like building a house on sand versus rock. And this was how he pushed through this idea that we have to focus on reliability.
So, Chaz, as I recall, you mentioned that you were also interested in Mikey's talk. Do you have anything you wanted to add to this?
No, I think for me that the pyramid was important for those reasons, especially because we're in a process here where we're trying to move towards a more DevOps-y place, and we're moving from a more traditional sysadmin role to something where we're trying to work closer with the developers, and that's an easy graphic to show people and just say, hey, this is what we need to look at. In that, I mean, it's basically the same thing Tom was talking about there, and Jeff. So yeah, that was pretty much what I was getting at with that. But also, for me, a lot of it was you could like Jessica and others were talking about, that sense that it was more than just a job to him. He talked about going back to Google and just something was missing.
You went back to unnamed high-tech Silicon Valley enterprise.
Yes. So yeah, that was really that really came through in his talk, that it meant that much to him, and I think that to me, as someone who, when he was there because part of the reason he was there was to try and get people to come, work for him, or work at least for the USDS. That's a huge thing that's really hard to get at a lot of places outside of that kind of experience. Especially out here in the Bay, something that's bigger than just making money or whatever. It changes things for people, for millions of people all over the country.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Cool. Do we want to go on to our another talk?
Yeah. Can we talk about the Meatfrastructure talk that the Alice Goldfuss, who I always want to call Rothfuss because Patrick Rothfuss is such a great author. So Meatfrastructure, first of all, excellent slides, very delicious meat, but also just such a good talk about kind of the philosophy of, I don't want to say so generally the philosophy of DevOps, but just bringing people into the fold and how to make a cohesive group, especially in a day and age of remote workers and different schedules, and just some of the very down-to-earth tactics she used. One of my favorites was, having a remote worker on Skype or whatever on a desk that she could run over and be like, hey, let me, let's talk this out. And it was just such a quick, easy fix for, a lot of community problems, I think, come from this lack of communication. I can't tell you how many groups I've been on where somebody who, works at home on Friday or might be on maternity leave part days, and they're not involved in the conversation, they're not involved in the conference calls or meetings, and then she made such a great argument for how to bring those people in. It was just a really excellent talk with just little tiny things to help save the day.
That talk was amazingly well received. The number of people who spoke to me about it afterwards, I'm really sad. I had to miss it. I had a commitment that had me in another room. So we definitely need to follow up on that one.
Yeah. I liked, to me the takeaways was so many of her techniques were, what do you do when you're growing a team and the culture changes that need to happen when that happens? And her phrase, you have to go from an oral tradition to a written tradition.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I've been trying to say that for 15 years and not being able to do it. And when she said that, I was like, that's well, to be honest, that's going to be a quote in my next book.
I was wondering about that.
Totally. Sorry, I don't want to dominate the conversation.
So
I think for me, she talked about a lot of things that I knew were a problem, especially because I'm in a position where I'm trying to scale up my group. We were shorthanded all summer, and then we finally got 2 new people, and now I'm trying to spin them up so we can get our projects going, and I'm running into all these problems where there's a lot of institutional knowledge. Because I've been here at New Star and the startup I was at that they bought before this, for 4.5 years. So I have all this institutional knowledge built up. And we've got one other admin on the team who's the same way. And then we've got, one person who started last year, and he's sort of spun up. But now we've got 2 people who are completely new. And we have this huge project we want to go on to. And it's like, all right, what do I need to start attacking? And I think she pointed out exactly what the things you need to start looking at and doing, and just and the other thing too is she was just a really good speaker. She was really engaging. She was always pulling you in there, and it wasn't it wasn't a boring textbook talk. It was a really engaging one that kept you involved. So that was really good.
One of the things I really like that she talked about was I love documentation. I've always been really big into documentation. So when she was talking about documentation, I was like, oh, she's preaching to the choir. I know so much. I'm so smart. But then she called out this idea that I have totally subsisted on with documentation of making the lowest man on the totem pole rewrite some of the documentation as you go along. And she was like, you can't do that. One, it makes it this crap job that you have to have when you start in, but also it doesn't give priority to documentation. So when they're trained up, they think they can just shirk that and pass it along to the next person down the totem pole. And it was such a good point, and it made me so mad because it was such a good point that was wrong with what I was doing. But it was a really good point. I just had to suck it up and take it.
Jeff, did you see the talk?
No, I'm not sure why, because I know I intended to, but listening to these comments, it's not one of the ones I was in, and I regret that because I've heard nothing but good things about it.
We'll get the link to the video.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the video
page as soon as it's available. Yeah.
So, Chas, you want to take one of your 3 and let's talk about it?
I guess the infrastructure, or not the infrastructure, the incident analysis workshop was really interesting for me, mostly because that's something we've tried starting to do more in-depth postmortems and sort of flesh that out in the last 6 months or so, and that's gone really well. But one of the things we haven't really done that workshop sort of impressed upon me was that we had to start gathering actual metrics to determine, like, hey, is all this postmortem stuff we're doing actually improving our response, and all that stuff around it, like, is it saving us money? And so a lot of the stuff I took from that workshop was, hey, this is how we can start attacking that problem. Actually, there was a lot of talks this year where like pulling those kinds of metrics out was something that a lot of people were talking about. Like Nicole Forsgren's talk about her first year at Chef, she talked about the same thing, but not about like process metrics, but process or system metrics, but organizational metrics, like how well do you, are you building your culture? How well are you, moving things through the release pipeline and stuff like that? Like, so I think, like, if I had to have one big takeaway from Lisa, period, it was like metrics, all the metrics. So
measure all the things.
Yes. But like measure all the things, all the right things, and then make sure that you're actually using them the right way.
Yeah, and one of the points she brought up was the fact that there was one of her directors there was absolutely adamant about the need for certain things, even though they were hard to gather, and then they found after a couple of months no one was actually using those metrics. They fell off that single sheet of the general status of the corporation. So it's one of those things that you want to actually gather more metrics than you need, including the ones you're absolutely sure are important, and then see if they really are, and continue to tweak them, because the last thing, the thing you want to avoid most is the old problem of people gaming the metrics.
Right.
Yeah, I think the quote that I tweeted from Nicole's talk was, if you're only using one metric to measure, success, you'll know which one is being gamed.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Jeff, you wanna talk about one of your three?
Actually,
sure.
Jeff, can I make a suggestion? You use
Absolutely.
this software supply chain. What does that mean?
So I guess one of the themes, and that's a great lead into what I was going to talk about, one of the themes that continues to surface and resurface in DevOps discussions is this notion of moving towards a manufacturing model. And if you look at a manufacturing model, one of the things I've actually referred to for a couple of decades now is the notion of a bill of materials approach to system administration. One of the things we've traditionally done, for example, is we prepare changes to systems and we test those changes. But of course, if you're doing it right, what you really want to do is test the system. And so if you know that this change affects this component, and there is a directed graph, a bill of materials that here are all of the things that rely on that component, what you should really be doing is testing everything downstream so that you know that that change didn't introduce any unexpected side effects. One of the things behind Docker is the fact that you can define all of your prerequisites, pull them all in with the Docker definition so that you have your entire bill of materials there. When you look at, many years ago I worked with an aerospace company that was building air parts, and one of the things that happens is you end up with this intricate bill of materials. In order to build this rudder, you have to build this tool, and you've got to get everything set up right so that you can actually pull it all together into this final component that has been assembled out of the previous levels of bits and everything. And that's coming more and more into the software side of things. So you end up with a better understanding of what are the components that go into this product, and how do you test those components, and how do you test the resultant product. And so the software supply chain speaks to that notion that you've got all of these products with all of these components from all these different sources, and how do you manage that complexity and gather metrics about that complexity in a meaningful way. So what some of the things he discussed was, how many different suppliers does Toyota have versus Ford, and how many do you have in your software supply chain. And because it was a talk given by Sonatype, who have the Nexus artifact repository software, they actually had real-world data that they could show that, for example, if 5% of your components had a zero-day exploit, well, that turns out to be a huge problem, and here's why. Let's look at the numbers. And the number of different suppliers that use these embedded components without advertising necessarily that they are, and so you get this carry-in effect because you don't understand your supply chain properly, and you think you package your systems, but you haven't.
So in other words, we used to think of software as something we write, but now what I hear you saying is we don't write software anymore. We take OpenSSL and 15 other libraries and frameworks, and we write some code, and so it's more like a car manufacturer that buys its tires from one company and its steering wheels from another, puts together the body and the engine, and so now we have a new metaphor.
Right. So two different parts. First of all, whenever we've written software, we've always had this. We've always had libraries we chose to use. We've always had utilities we've chosen to use in our systems, like RDist or rsync or SSH or all of those things. We've always had those libraries to deal with, but we've sort of done it implicitly and only worried about the bit that we wrote ourselves. So this is about exposing those implicit assumptions. So that's the first part. And then the other thing is that you'll see one of the trends as we move towards microservices and APIs and things like that is we are actually moving towards what's now being referred to as the no-stack programmer, because all you end up writing is the glue that pulls all these API calls together into a piece of functionality. So we're actually seeing a couple of variations of that theme.
So I want to remind our viewing audience, if you're watching us live, we have a Q&A option in the upper right corner. If you don't see a button labeled Q&A, check out the 3x3 grid. Click on that, and you should see a Q&A button. Jessica, I think it's your turn.
I feel like I'm cheating on this one, but I think one of the reasons that people go to conferences is for the tracks and all these intelligent people speaking on all these amazing things. But the hallway conversations and the dinner conversations is like one of the reasons I absolutely love coming to LISA is just getting to sit with other people and talk about, mundane stuff or, what they thought about the talks, and, to meet with people who are doing the same or similar things that you're doing. So I had dinner with a bunch of really amazing, smart people on Wednesday night, and, dinner conversation was cool and made me feel like nerdy but loved, and I don't know, that's just one of the things I love about LISA. And I cheated, I'm sorry.
That's not cheating at all. I mean, that is one of my high points.
Yeah, it's definitely the same thing for me. Like, I definitely like just being with smart people. That's one of the things I look for when I look for a job. So, I mean, it's the same preference.
How many dinner conversations can you be like, oh my God, let's talk about metrics, right?
Totally.
Well, certainly a lot of them at this conference.
Right.
I made it a special point this year to try to hang out in the hallway and have more impromptu conversations, because I've not been able to do that the last couple of years because I've been busy with committees and stuff. But one of the things that so people think I'm smart, but I'm actually really dumb, but I hang out with smart people and it rubs off on me. And a lot of that comes from my early years at LISA and just, getting all this philosophy and stuff on how to build better systems. And it's good stuff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
When I'm asked by other people about LISA, because they know all these other conferences, and the way I describe LISA is it's the drinking from the fire hose conference. You have a lot of information from so many different areas, where you can get into a lot of depth or just go wide. And having been coming to this conference since '94. It's always been fascinating. The conversations you can have with people in the hallway track has been one of the things that brings people back year on year. Even as they move into more senior roles where they're taking more of a mentor role rather than being the ones to soak up the knowledge, that hallway track is just invaluable.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about the hallway track is that people can summarize the talks they went to earlier that day, and it gives me an idea of, oh, well, okay, I missed all that. Now I need to go back and watch the videos or read the paper or whatever, because there's no way to attend the entire conference. It's, there's X number of tracks happening. You can only be in one place at one time. And also, if you did go to the same track that they were at, the follow-on conversation that can be sparked by that. It's actually where the lightning talks comes from. the whole idea of being able to take the things we heard earlier in the week and come up with new ideas on the fly at the end of the week is really important. So Jessica, you were about to say something, and I think I interrupted
Oh,
you.
I was just going to say we're doing at UCSD we're doing a lot of reorganization of our IT side of the house, and I was making the point in a meeting that I'm a mediocre technologist, and I can't be the smartest technologist in the room, or else I'm in the wrong room. So I'm a mediocre technologist, but I'm a really great sponge. So I love to soak up new knowledge. I really love doing it, but I can't be the smartest person, or else, I'm soaking up mediocre stuff.
So we actually have a relevant to an earlier conversation question just came in from Brian Haney. Were there any talks about organizational dynamics, team culture, or the mechanics of running a tech team? I would have to say there were. Any of our guests want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, Alice's talk was definitely one, right? And then Connie Lynn's talk. What's Connie Lynn's last name? I don't know.
Quinn, I think. I think it's Quinn.
Quinn. Her talk was really great too, and that talk was about like organization and team building, but also, oh gosh, I didn't take any notes, or I have notes, but they're not in front of me. Anybody can jump in and.
Let me see. I have my notes right here.
Fine.
She touched on a lot of stuff, like not just how you manage people, but also how to hire people. Like she talked a lot about like, hey, these are the kinds of questions I talk to people about. Also, now I can't remember. But like also making sure that your questions and your interviewing stuff is written down, and so that anybody can do a phone interview, anybody can do an in-person interview and know what sort of things you're looking for. And it's Villani, isn't it, Tom? I think you just said that was her last name. So I'm sorry.
No problem. We'll get it in the show notes. I was not able to attend her talk. I was in a competing talk, but I heard good things about it. Did she talk about coaching?
Yeah, I think so. Let me see. I'm sure I have something in here. Yeah, she talked a lot about one-on-ones, for instance. Mm-hmm. And I was reminded that I need to listen more in one-on-ones, which I don't always do the best. I think the other thing she pointed out that I think is really important that people sometimes miss is if you have over like 7 people, you will always be a person down. So you have to plan on that.
One of the things I liked what she talked about with team building and just like culture building is one of the things that was like the post-mortem. Instead of making that an event that everybody is dreaded to go to, like there's going to be blame assigned. And she was like, make sure that, first of all, don't call them post-mortems. But I really love that name, so that's really hard for me to give up. I just think that's like macabre and just so wonderful. But I love the idea that you celebrate successes and that it's not about assigning blame. It's trying to figure out what went wrong and how to improve it. And I thought all of those were, again, just on the ground, very realistic techniques that you can use to kind of change the culture of, instead of a blame culture, more of an improving culture.
So if you're looking for this talk, it's called Interfacing with Humans, How to Manage and Prod Ops, by Connie Lynn Villani, if I'm reading that right. Yay, yeah. Old eyes.
And she has some interesting background. She's been, I think, an electrical engineer by training, but a manager by history. And I mean, she's been at some really large production environments like. Oh, now I'm blanking on.
Groupon was, I think, where she was before. She's at change.org now, I think.
Right, and Second Life was the other one, which is, big, critical, like, people at the time that she was there, people really noticed if it was down. So, yeah, good stuff.
So, Chaz, I think it's your turn to to bring up one of your top three.
Okay, I think we've actually talked about all of them because Connie Lynn's talk was actually my third, and Mikey's was my first. So I will let somebody else take one, I guess, or we can grab another one. I'm sure I can find another one here.
You know, we're kind of at the halfway point, so this might be a good time to take a little break and change the pace for a second. Did anyone? What was the most surprising thing, or did anyone see something or a talk that just really just was a surprise or unexpected?
I don't know if there was anything super surprising. A lot of it was more presenting stuff that I sort of already knew in a way that sort of made it obvious. Like, it's the sort of things that you have going in the back of your brain. I should really do this, or boy, that's really a problem that I deal with, and like crystallizing it and saying, hey, here's something that
something you could do about it.
Yeah. That's kind of the important part, actually.
There's a lot of dot connecting at Lisa.
Yes.
Yes.
For sure.
So, was there? Well, let me rephrase that. Since we're kind of taking a side channel here, all three of you spoke at the conference. Could each of you give us just a quickie 2-minute summary of what your talk was about?
Sure, I'll fill a silence. You go first, Chaz.
I actually didn't speak, so I'll let you guys go.
My bad.
It's okay.
All right. Well then, so I was speaking about taking DevOps practices into large enterprise settings, and the challenge that underlies that. I mean, one of the things that's fascinating is that people talk about DevOps as this sort of isolated software development, almost, sort of IT function, but it's a much wider impact than that, because when you look at large enterprises, their entire existence is built around the introduction of new products in a waterfall, highly complex, expensive manner, where each of the departments have to go off and do their bits and then bring it all back. So software development's only ever one piece. And so when you talk about DevOps just in an IT setting, you're doing yourself a disservice, because it has the potential to completely re-engineer the corporation from a waterfall to a factory floor widget model. And so I talked about that and some of the DevOps adoption patterns. And the other thing that just briefly that I think is really interesting in all of this is that you're dealing with trying to move molasses, because you've got corporations who have got their ISO 9000 quality certification, and now they don't want to do anything to risk that, when the entire purpose behind ISO 9000 is TQM, which is define your process and then improve your process to improve the quality of the result. But if you define your process and then stop changing the process, you've in fact held your quality at one particular level and you've stopped yourself moving forward as an organization. But because they're now scared about losing their ISO cert, that's what happens to most companies.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Jessica, do you want to tell us about your talk?
Sure. I talked about, it was called The Feeding and Care of Community. I at UCSD, my job is to kind of bring the technical communities on campus together. So we have lots of departments that are siloed. They're, sysadmins for one department, or there's a group of sysadmins for another department. And a lot of times what happens is that they reinvent the wheel because they're not aware that the technology that they're implementing might be used somewhere else on campus. So my job is trying to create a community, but my talk was basically about either creating a new community or reviving stagnant communities, and kind of how to articulate the importance of community in order to convince people to join your community, or also to convince people to give funding for your community, because it takes money to make money. So that was it. That was my talk, my talk was amazing and awesome, and everybody should watch it.
I watched your talk. I was there, and I agree. It was a very good talk, and community is something that's very near and dear to me, which is why I'm so actively involved in LISA. It is community for me.
And communities don't happen by themselves. They really do need someone, pushing a little oxygen on them to keep them alive.
They require energy. Absolutely. Quick comment.
The catchphrase that I always liked that Sejo you used was the network behind the people behind the network.
I like
Yes.
that.
Sure.
I like
that
that.
a lot.
We may dust that off and reuse it. Quick follow-up to previous conversation. Arnold de Leon commented that postmortem should be called postpartum since they happen after something new.
I think
I don't know
that
if
is
I usually, that'd be one ugly baby in many cases.
And I'm afraid of the depression, actually.
Yeah.
So Jessica, I think it's your turn to mention one of your top three, or have we gone through all of them?
My last one was speaking at LISA for the first time, and I would love to talk about it because I think there's probably a lot of people out there that suffer from imposter syndrome and think that they can't speak at LISA, that they're not smart enough, that their talk would not be interesting. I was very fortunate that I am part of the sister.org community that is, women in technology mailing list, and somebody had asked a question about building sysadmin communities on their campus, and I was like, oh, I can answer this question, and so I got very excited and wrote a really long email to the person, and at the same time that sister community was doing a Google Hangout with Sarah May, who is really big in the Ruby on Rails community, which I do a Ruby on Rails women's workshop here in San Diego. So she was giving a talk on how to put in a what is that called? A talk proposal. So I listened to her Google Hangout, and she sent me some templates, and I worked from that to submit a talk. And I was shocked and very honored that they picked my talk. But I think it's one of those things is a lot of people don't do it because they just don't think what they have to say is interesting. But more importantly, especially with women and minorities, a lot of people don't feel like they're an expert in what they do. And it's not about being an expert. It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about having an experience that you can relate and share with other people so that they can learn from it. So I would encourage like 1 million billion people to submit proposals for talks because everybody has a unique story to tell.
Indeed. In one of the workshops that we did, there was a discussion of this thing called implicit invitation, where it culturally, socially, whatever, there's a group of people, unfortunately mostly women and minorities, who really need to be directly invited to do something. They're less likely to step forward and say, I can do this, just because, hey, it got mentioned, they saw a call for proposals or whatever. And that's a really hard one for a conference chair to do, is to contact 5,000 people and invite each and every one of them to submit a proposal. So anyone who is considering writing a proposal for any conference, whether it's the LISA conference, Cascadia IT, LOMSA East, Scale, whatever, write the proposal, submit it. Most conferences that are established will provide guidance in some form or another in how to write a proposal, how to make a stronger proposal. Contact someone you know who's already given a proposal and given a talk and see what their proposals look like. But the first step is to actually write the proposal.
Sure.
Because you're not going to be invited to talk if you don't.
True. And a lot of people think that invited talks means like you just sit in a room and someone says, oh, you're good, I'll invite you. But it's actually kind of a misnomer. You send in a proposal saying, I would like to do this talk, and then you get the top proposals get invited to the conference. So that's one myth I'd like to bust. The next I wanted to just say, if anyone listening to this wants someone to proofread their proposal or just bounce ideas, I'm always willing to do that. Just send me email and we'll put that in the show notes, or just contact me through Twitter. And the other thing I wanted to say is I was very lucky. I had a manager who years ago who suggested that I write papers and submit talk proposals to conferences, and he said, at my point in my career, this would be a good thing to do. And that little nudge, which could have been a very thoughtful thing, or it could have been an offhanded comment that he just happened to make in the hallway. It changed my life. I submitted stuff that led to my my books and other things. And so if you don't have that coach or mentor in your life, be your own coach and say, I'm a couple years into the industry. A lot of people say, oh, I can never give a talk. I can't talk about Apache. I didn't create it. Well, you know what? If you're first of all, you don't have to have created something to give a talk about it. Second of all, if people in your office always go to you whenever there's a question about XYZ, then take that as a hint that you would probably you are the expert that conferences need to give talks on those things. And if that XYZ topic comes up and you always have 3 things to say and then 2 more little bits of advice, well, there you have a top 5 things you should know about XYZ. There's your talk.
Yeah.
And
So
may I add one more thing, please?
go ahead.
What I was going to say is just to add on, like, if you are in a community and you go to somebody and keep asking the same questions and you think they're brilliant, suggest to them that they might submit a talk or submit a proposal. I happen to work with a very, very smart woman, and this year we were chatting and we were both going to the same UC-wide tech conference, and I said, you should really give a talk about Slack. Like, you did this installation, you did this, you should totally give a talk. And she said, I'm not really confident to do the talk by myself. And I was like, well, then let's do it together. And we wrote a proposal together and submitted it. It wasn't accepted, but, it got her over that hurdle of, she is brilliant and wasn't opposed to speaking. She just needed a little bit of nudge to be like, hey, did you ever think of doing this? And a lot of people, that just doesn't cross their mind.
So I want to make 2 points real quick, both relating to what you just said. First, Corey, one of the co-chairs of this conference, posted saying, following up on what Jessica said, don't be discouraged by your talk being rejected. This year we had approximately 225 submissions for 50 slots.
Wow.
We had to turn down stuff we would have liked to take. So it doesn't necessarily mean your talk wasn't good enough. It just may mean that we got really overwhelmed by wonderful good submissions and we had to choose, as it was, lots of people are complaining, well, I couldn't choose between the 3 tracks and and that's a wonderful complaint. We want to hear that complaint. I'm not complaining about that complaint, just for the record. But it is a reality that a conference will get a lot of submissions. Keep going. Keep submitting. Item 2A that I just thought of, there are lots of small regional conferences, for example, Cascadia and LOPSA East, that are a great place if you're just thinking of, maybe I want to give a little talk, but I don't want a huge pressure of the LISA conference. You can submit to the local regional conference. 125 people, you'll have maybe 30 or 40 people listening to your talk, and it's a lot less pressure. Other suggestions: Scale, Ohio Linux Blast, Foxconn, etc.
Or your local user group. I mean, monthly user groups are desperate for speakers.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the other one I wanted to mention.
Oh, sorry.
But I want to get back to the other thing that Jessica said, which was, let's do this talk together. Do the 3 of you want to talk about mentorship as speakers, or mentorship in general, perhaps? Jessica?
I don't need a mentor for speaking. I don't know if you met me before, but you can't get me to shut up.
That doesn't mean you can't be a mentor.
There's a big difference between speaking in front of an audience, though, and just speaking a lot in a small group. Like, I can do the latter pretty easily. The speaking in front of a giant audience, that's a little more intimidating, for sure.
Well, I think Tom recently tweeted that somebody asked him how do you get over that fear, and his response, Tom, I'm going to misquote you, I'm sure, but was, you just got to keep doing it, and it'll eventually go away, or maybe just minimize.
Yeah. No, you got it. They were asking, how do you get over fear of speaking to large crowds, and it's just like, you just have to keep on doing it. The first time I spoke to a big audience, my hands were shaking, and that was nervous making, and I don't know how many times later that didn't happen, but just because I kept forcing myself to do it.
One thing I find helps me a lot is really knowing the material. Knowing it well enough that you can go off script and be accurate makes a huge difference. Even if it's a very narrow focused thing, knowing a lot about that narrow focused thing can be very helpful. Or if you're going to give a kind of a meandering broad talk, know a lot of little bits. You can have a lot of shallow knowledge. But feeling comfortable in your knowledge base is critical. And the way to do that is by teaching it. Part of teaching is talking.
Also, while we're on the subject, I'd say doing one rehearsal in front of a human being, like even if it's one person, is better than 1,000 times doing it, alone in a room. And all of my talks, I always do it at a local user group, a month or two before Lisa, and it often gets totally rewritten because after the talk I do Q&A, and then I do, tell me what I did wrong, and I get lots of really good feedback.
So, Chaz, what will we have to do to convince you to submit a talk for Lisa next year?
That's a good question. I actually, the project I'm working on now is something pretty interesting to me. Assuming it goes well, like that would be something I'd be interested in talking about. I don't know that it'd be super interesting for Lisa, but it would definitely be. Yeah.
There's other conferences, and one you said if it goes well. Keep in mind, a lot of the talks are.
That would also be interesting, I suppose.
Yeah, learning from failure is just as valid as learning from success.
Right.
Don't do this thing we did. It didn't work.
I've always wanted to do like a learning from failure, like talk about like how to deal with like really terrible bosses. But then I'm always afraid it's going to get back to like a boss that I was really terrible.
Just make it generic enough.
We'll let you do it anonymously.
They'll just
let me tell you, there are enough common ways in which bosses are bad that you can talk about them and they won't know.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. No case studies. That's the trick.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Well, those are the only interesting part. I mean, or the most interesting part.
It also depends how many places you've worked. Like I've only had 2 jobs since I've left college, basically. So that kind of limits the number of people that I can possibly be talking about.
And you change the industry or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just every case study would be this friend of mine.
Yeah.
I'm asking for a friend. No, really.
So these are good first-time speaker tips. What about first-time attendee tips? What advice would you give to someone who's never come to Lisa before?
I think the most important advice that I would give to a first-time attendee is don't be scared to introduce yourself to people. The whole point of this thing is to walk up to people that you would not otherwise know. If you find the conversation interesting, there are lots of opportunities both just sitting around the hallway or at the luncheons or the breaks or sitting next to people in a talk. Getting to know new people and expanding your network is it's the first step. It's the hard one. Everyone is incredibly friendly, but you just need to actually make that first step.
Yep, I think that's definitely good advice. I think I'd also say don't lock yourself into something. Like don't sit down the week before the conference and say, all right, I'm going to go to this talk, this talk, this talk, and this talk. Just see where you can go to the first one, and if it's not really gripping you, don't be afraid to adjust what you want to go to later, or even sneak out the back if it's really not appropriate to what I went to a talk that was on something and it was about something completely different than I thought it was just from the name, so I went to a different talk around the corner, and I don't think anybody has a huge problem with that. So.
And keep in mind that you don't always have to just be in the talks. Sometimes you need to take a break and let your mind rest. And sitting in the hall and chatting with there's always people in the hallway. There's always hallway track opportunity.
Yep.
Don't feel that, oh my God, my employer is paying all this money for me to be here, or even worse, I'm paying all this money to be here. I have to attend the talks and the tutorials. You need to give your mind a rest every once in a while too.
Yeah.
The only time you'd have to be there is when you're the one giving the presentation, and then it usually helps.
And also, I've had someone gave me this great expression. They said, sometimes they walk into a talk and they realize it's super advanced and not what they expected. And sometimes they move to a different session, but sometimes they decide, I'm just going to sit here and let the information flow over me. And I won't understand most of it, but I'll start picking up terminology, and I'll know when I get home I'll have a list of words I need to look up. And I thought, wow, what an interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, on that same note, I think this is not Jessica's therapy session, but I think that every time I go to Lisa, there's that moment where you're so surrounded by really smart people, you think, I'm not in the right place. Like, I'm not nearly as smart as these people, or I went to a session that was just too much. I'm not that smart. And that happens because it's such a great high quality conference. It's not about if you could understand everything that was going on in every session, it would be the most boring conference ever. So just be willing to feel uncomfortable for a while and just be like, yeah, I'm totally way in over my head, but I'm just going to tread water and see what happens.
Yeah. If you knew everything, you wouldn't need to come to the conference.
That's so true.
Yeah. Awesome. So it's getting towards the time that we need to wrap up. So I want to give everyone a chance to say any last words or any final thoughts, and then we'll go to our rapid questions.
Boston's going to be cold next year.
Yeah, it's in December too, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah, that was one of my first ones, and that's a cold city when it wants to be. But it's all, you don't have to go outside. When you do, it wakes you up really, really quickly.
Yeah. One of the things about these conferences, you spend most of your time in the hotel, so planning a little bit of time before or after the conference is quite reasonable, especially if it's a town you've never been to and you're curious about. Don't forget to allow time for sightseeing. Boston in December, pack warm.
Ooh.
Absolutely.
You'll use it to get to the various dinners that you go to.
It's been in December. It's been in Boston in December a number of times, and I have to say, every time I was so afraid, but then I ended up. I can't remember which hotel it's in, but it's usually.
Sheraton.
Hotel it'll be in next time, but in the past years, it was always in a hotel that was connected to a mall, and I basically was able to stay inside the whole week. But I went out once or twice because it was really cold. But I did go out once or twice, and I think this next time I plan on coming a couple days early and doing some sightseeing, because I've never really done that in Boston, even though I've been to Boston many times.
Boston's really walkable. Like, it's really easy to get around by walking or taking the T. So it's definitely good for that. Although I suppose it'll be less walkable in December.
We've rarely had snow on the ground, and Tom, we're in the same hotel again. We're in the Sheraton downtown, or in the Sheraton next to the Habitrail, as I call them.
Yes, and I have to say, I think some of the Boston Lisas have been some of the best ones.
Yeah. The cool thing about conference dinners and stuff is you meet a random variety of people. There's usually a notice board, or actually I think this time we had 2 of them because they were so popular, where people can post and say, hey, I'm going to go to dinner at this time, who wants to join me? And here's where we're going. And you get some really interesting conversations that happen just over random strangers who decide to all go to dinner at the same time in the same location.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard the Slack channel was really great for that this year. There was a lot of people meeting up on Slack and planning dinners and outings out. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, cool.
And the 2 organized dinners were really good too. I only went to the first one, but I heard the second one was pretty good too.
Word is that we will be doing that again next year. So for those who don't know, there was a pre-scheduled, one person led a large group, I don't know how large, on, what was it, Sunday and Monday night, I think it was. Sunday and Monday night.
That sounds right.
They each went to, they pre-picked a destination and said, meet at this location, we're all going to go to this place, and had a large group opportunity, 35 people each night, I'm informed. The response was very good. I think is the way I want to put that. It's a great idea because at the beginning of the conference week, you meet a whole bunch of people that you then bump into the rest of the week. And it gives you that nucleating point to start meeting other people, and that's really important. Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts before we go into our rapid fire questions? Okay, well, I want to thank all three of you, and we'll start the rapid fire round. This time we're going to do it a little differently. Tom and I will also be participating. You ready for that, Tom?
Yes.
All right, so question number 1. Starting with Chastity, going to Jeff and Jessica, and then on to Tom and back to me. What was the first computer you owned or used?
The first computer I used, I think it was TRS-80, actually, at a friend's house.
Awesome.
What model?
Oh, geez, I don't remember. I was in 5th grade, so it's a little hazy.
Okay. Jeff?
So first computer I used was a PDP-8, ASR33 teletypes on the terminals, Dartmouth Basic, and binary on the front panel. The first computer I owned was one of the first Apple II computers, which was actually running on 110 volt transformers because we're 240 volts over here. So there you go. They're the first. Paper tape. That's how old.
Jessica?
I think my first computer was a compact portable, the one where the keyboard fit into the top of the screen, and like it was a suitcase that you could carry around. Yeah, like that. It was so heavy. It was like the heaviest. Yeah, it was the luggable. Yeah, but I was very young when we got the computer, and they cleared my little sister's room out, and she had to sleep with us, and or in my room, and then I like burst into tears, and my mother was like, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "The computer is going to change everything." Wow, how deep
You are so pathetic.
Why did you have to move your sister out? I mean, the computer wasn't that big.
Yeah. I have no idea. I did not make these decisions. I was little.
Lee, you're next.
No, Tom, you're next.
Oh, okay. Then my first computer that I used was, I don't know what kind it was, but our computer, we had 3 terminals in our school. Every school in the school district had 3 terminals. They were a paper printout, and you would type, and it would scroll up, and we were programming BASIC. The first one that I owned was a Commodore VIC-20.
Wow.
And here's where I show the gray hairs. The first computer I touched, I jokingly say that I cut my teeth on an IBM 360. I was actually 3 years old, so I doubt I was literally cutting my teeth on it. But yeah, that was the first computer I ever touched. The first one I ever owned was a TRS-80 Model 1, which is why I was curious to know what model yours was.
Cool.
So, Tom, your turn to ask a question.
So, our question number 2 is, have you ever had to press the big red switch, that is the emergency power-off button for a server room or data center? Chastity?
No, I have not. Though I did work with Ed Kroll, whose daughter is the namesake of the Molly Guard, which is usually on top of the server shut-off buttons.
Cool. Jeff?
So again, no, I haven't had to press the button in anger. What I did do when I was running the crew at eSmith was we actually had a different member of the team use DR to fail over between sites on a several times a month basis, tweak the procedure, tweak the automation. So basically every member of the team knew how to do it, knew what it looked like, didn't have any stress, and the one time that we had to do that under real emergent conditions, there was just no stress, because you don't want your team panicking at that point of the day.
Cool. Jessica?
I have poor impulse control, so don't show me a red button. I would totally press it, but nobody's given me that option.
Lee?
Yes, actually, I had a server room where the UPS caught on fire.
Oh my gosh!
Wow.
Yeah, that was a
exciting.
great thing. And it was so disappointing. I hit the button, and they had miswired the room. One of the air conditioning units stayed on.
Oh my God!
Wow.
So we still had wind blowing in the fire, and then the halon dump. And boy, was I spun up on caffeine and Mountain Dew from that one. Tom?
Wow. I have never had the opportunity. I've pressed it. I have recollection of pressing one once. I think it was just like a construction was done on a new data center, and I said I just want to press it once, but that's the closest that I've gotten.
And our last question, starting with Chaz. Who's your favorite computer scientist or author?
Boy. Well, if I can't pick Tom, then I'll say probably John Alspaugh. I really like what I've read from him.
Jeff?
I'm going to go with two. I'm going to go with Fred Brooks Jr. and Tom DeMarco. And the books in question are Mythical Man Month and Peopleware.
Jessica?
I've said it before and I'll say it again. I absolutely adore and love Kathy Sierra. She wrote a blog called Creating Passionate Users a million billion years ago, but she also has a whole bunch of other books. Her latest is called Badass Making Users Awesome. And it's just a wonderful book on user communities, and it has a lot of the community building stuff that I use all the time, but not necessarily, you can use what she applies to users to greater communities. And her style of writing is very easily accessible, and she's just the bomb. I love her.
Tom?
Since I first learned about him many years ago, Alan Turing, especially his theorems about data compression, believe it or not. Lee?
Well, actually, I was just about to say Turing, and then I thought, no, Dennis Ritchie. He is brilliant. Was brilliant and truly a humble man, and I am so thrilled that I actually got a chance to talk to him. Just totally amazing, and I look up to him every time I think about him. It's like, yeah, I wish I could be that good.
Yeah, he's amazing. Cool.
So thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. And Julie has asked me to remind the people who attended this year's conference, please fill out your surveys. They do tell us a lot about how to make the conference even more successful. Brings us to the end of this month's LISA Conversation. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Julie from USENIX for all the backstage work, to our live listeners for their questions, and to our guests, Jeff, Chess, and Jessica for joining us.
Yay! Well, we'll be taking a break in December, so please join us on January 26th when we'll have a conversation with one of this year's speakers. Check our website for details. This is Tom Limoncelli.
And this is Lee Damon. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next year.